Did you know the UK now spends more on debt interest than on schools or the police? Or that for every 100 workers, there are soon going to be almost 40 retirees to support? Beneath the surface of Britain's daily headlines lies a growing storm, an economic time bomb that's quietly ticking. It's not just about inflation or a bad housing market. We're talking about 10 deep-rooted problems that could reshape the country's future in ways most people don't see coming. From a shrinking workforce to invisible trade traps, each issue reveals a side of the economy that rarely makes the news. Once you see the full picture, you won't look at Britain's future the same way again. Number 1. Aging population crisis. Britain is undergoing a dramatic demographic transformation. The number of people over 65 is growing rapidly, while the number of working-age citizens is shrinking. According to the Office for National Statistics, by 2040, nearly 25% of the UK population will be classified as elderly. This shift puts enormous pressure on public finances, particularly the state pension system and NHS services. As life expectancy increases, the number of years people rely on government support also rises. This means the economic burden per taxpayer will grow significantly, especially when fewer people are contributing to the tax base. The consequences are not theoretical, they are already unfolding. Healthcare demand is surging, with age-related illnesses like dementia, arthritis, and heart disease placing increased strain on hospitals and care facilities. Meanwhile, fewer younger people are entering the workforce to replace retirees, creating a skills shortage that limits innovation and productivity. Industries that rely on physical labor or hands-on expertise, such as construction, farming, and manufacturing, are particularly vulnerable. At the same time, caregiving roles, often low-paid and underappreciated, are becoming harder to fill, adding even more strain on families and local councils. Economically, this creates a situation where more money is being spent on supporting the aging than on investing in the future. Education, infrastructure, and technology upgrades are being sidelined to cover growing pension and care costs. This imbalance leads to slower economic growth, reduced consumer spending, and lower national competitiveness. If left unchecked, the aging population could turn into a generational crisis, where younger Britons are taxed more, receive fewer services, and inherit a weakened economy. Without bold reforms and long-term planning, this demographic shift could quietly destabilize the foundations of Britain's economic future. Number 2. Low productivity growth. One of the most persistent economic issues Britain faces is stagnant productivity. In simple terms, workers are not producing significantly more value per hour than they were a decade ago. Since the 2008 financial crisis, productivity growth in the UK has been remarkably weak, especially compared to other advanced economies like Germany and the United States. This matters because productivity is directly linked to wage growth, living standards, and national competitiveness. When output per worker stalls, the entire economy feels the drag: fewer profits for businesses, lower tax revenues for the government, and limited scope for wage increases. Despite rapid advancements in technology and automation, many British sectors have failed to see a corresponding rise in output. Part of the issue lies in underinvestment. Businesses often delay upgrades to equipment, training, or digital tools, particularly in small and medium-sized enterprises. The UK also suffers from a shortage of technical skills, with too many workers in low-skill or repetitive jobs that are vulnerable to automation but offer little room for upskilling. Public transport inefficiencies and digital infrastructure gaps outside London only deepen the divide, slowing worker efficiency across entire regions. This productivity stagnation ripples through society. People work longer hours but see little to no improvement in income. Public services face budget constraints because tax revenues grow slowly. Ambitious projects, whether it's boosting green energy, modernizing hospitals, or improving schools, get delayed or downsized. The country becomes less attractive to foreign investors, who favor dynamic economies with rising output and innovation. Without targeted policies to encourage innovation, regional development, and workforce training, Britain risks falling behind not just in earnings, but in its ability to adapt and compete in a rapidly evolving global economy. Number 3. Overreliance on the financial sector. Britain's economy leans heavily on its financial services industry, particularly in London's financial district, known globally as the City. Banking, insurance, asset management, and fintech account for a significant share of GDP and tax revenue. On the surface, this seems like a success story, an efficient, world-class sector generating billions annually. But this overdependence also makes the UK highly vulnerable. If global markets falter or regulatory changes shift the competitive balance, the country faces disproportionate economic shocks with nationwide consequences. This imbalance didn't happen overnight. Over the last 40 years, successive governments neglected manufacturing, agriculture, and regional industries, instead focusing policy and investment on financial services. As a result, entire regions, particularly in the North and Midlands, lost their industrial base, leading to higher unemployment and economic stagnation. Meanwhile, London thrived, deepening the divide. When the financial sector experiences a slowdown, as seen during the 2008 global crisis, it sends shockwaves through housing, employment, and public finance, because too much of Britain's economic engine is tied to one concentrated hub. Beyond financial risk, this focus also limits long-term resilience. An economy that lacks diversity across sectors is less adaptable to technological disruptions, geopolitical changes, or environmental challenges. Countries like Germany have shown the strength of a balanced industrial economy, where strong regional hubs contribute to overall growth. Britain, by contrast, is missing out on innovation and growth outside the capital. Rebalancing the economy would mean investing in green energy, manufacturing, advanced tech, and rural development, creating jobs and reducing dependency on one volatile sector. Without that shift, Britain continues to walk a narrow path, where even a small stumble in the financial world. Number 4. Skyrocketing national debt. The UK's national debt has reached historic levels, now exceeding £2.6 trillion, which is more than 100% of the country's GDP. This isn't just a large number on a spreadsheet. It represents a deepening financial strain on future generations. Every year, billions are spent just on interest payments, before even touching the actual debt. As global interest rates rise, those payments consume an even larger chunk of the government's budget, limiting investment in essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Debt itself isn't inherently bad. Many countries borrow to fund growth, but the danger lies in how the money is used. Much of the UK's recent borrowing has gone towards short-term crisis management, rather than long-term investment. Pandemic relief, energy subsidies, and emergency support have helped millions in the short run, but little has been done to generate future returns. The result is a mounting pile of obligations without the economic growth to offset them. This increases the risk of austerity measures, where governments cut public spending to manage debt, often at the expense of low-income households and public services. The debt burden also affects national flexibility. In times of crisis, whether it's a recession, war, or natural disaster, governments need fiscal space to respond. High debt reduces that space, making Britain more vulnerable to external shocks. Investors may lose confidence, borrowing costs can rise, and credit ratings can be downgraded. All of this leads to a cycle of economic instability. To avoid this trap, the UK needs to shift its focus from reactive borrowing to strategic investment, targeting areas that drive long-term productivity, reduce inequality, and ensure financial sustainability. Without this shift, the nation's growing debt could quietly evolve into a full-blown economic crisis. Number 5. Stagnant wages and job insecurity. Despite record employment numbers, many workers in the UK are experiencing stagnant wages and increasing job insecurity. Over the past decade, average earnings have failed to keep pace with inflation, meaning real wages have effectively shrunk. People are working more, but taking home less value for their effort. This trend undermines consumer spending, which is a critical driver of economic growth. When households tighten their budgets, businesses struggle, tax revenues fall, and economic momentum slows across the board. Adding to the issue is the rise of precarious employment. Gig economy roles, zero-hour contracts, and part-time work now account for a growing share of jobs. While these offer flexibility, they often come without job security, benefits, or predictable income. Millions of workers are left vulnerable, unable to plan for the future or secure stable housing. For younger generations, this creates a sense of economic anxiety, with fewer people contributing consistently to pension schemes or long-term savings. The long-term effect? An aging workforce with fewer financial safety nets. placing further strain on public support systems. This shift also has a hidden cost. It erodes skills development and productivity. Insecure workers are less likely to receive training or stay in one role long enough to advance their abilities. Over time, this leads to a less capable workforce and wider economic inefficiency. A thriving economy depends on workers who feel valued, stable, and invested in, not those stuck in survival mode. To change course, the UK must reform labor protections, raise the minimum wage, and incentivize businesses to offer full-time, meaningful employment. Without structural change, stagnant wages and insecure jobs will continue to sap both the confidence and the capability of Britain's working population. Number 6. Underinvestment in infrastructure. Across the UK, signs of infrastructure neglect are becoming harder to ignore. Aging rail networks, frequent road congestion, and outdated water systems are just a few symptoms of decades of underinvestment. While other developed nations have poured money into modernizing their infrastructure, Britain has often taken a stop-start approach, with inconsistent funding and short-term planning. As a result, transport, energy, and digital systems are struggling to keep up with both population growth and technological demand. Transport is one of the clearest examples. In many regions outside London, trains are unreliable, buses infrequent, and roads poorly maintained. This limits access to jobs, delays deliveries, and reduces overall economic efficiency. The same applies to broadband access. Rural and poorer urban areas still suffer from slow internet speeds, which directly impact education, remote work, and digital businesses. In an era where connectivity drives commerce, this digital divide holds back entrepreneurship and innovation. Without the right infrastructure, businesses hesitate to invest and communities struggle to grow. The consequences ripple far beyond convenience. Poor infrastructure contributes to regional inequality, low productivity, and weak global competitiveness. Investors and international companies often favor countries with faster logistics, reliable utilities, and scalable technology networks. Britain's current state sends the opposite message, a nation unable to maintain or modernize its basic systems. To reverse this, the UK must commit to long-term strategic investment, not just quick fixes. Projects like high-speed rail, green energy grids, and nationwide fiber-optic internet could unlock regional growth, reduce carbon emissions, and future-proof the economy. Without these steps, the UK risks falling behind, not just in comfort, but in economic relevance and resilience on the world stage. Number 7. Declining birth rate. Britain's birth rate has been steadily falling and is now well below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. Recent statistics show that the average UK birth rate hovers around 1.55, signaling a long-term demographic trend that could reshape the entire economy. With fewer children being born each year, the future workforce is shrinking, while the population of retirees continues to grow. This creates a dangerous imbalance where fewer workers support more dependents, increasing pressure on taxes, public services, and pensions. This shift doesn't just affect numbers. It impacts economic dynamism. A younger population typically fuels innovation, entrepreneurship, and consumer spending. Fewer young people means fewer startups, lower demand for housing, and reduced consumption of goods and services that drive growth. It also results in a smaller talent pool, making it harder for businesses to fill roles in healthcare, education, tech, and other vital sectors. Countries with low birth rates, like Japan and South Korea, already face these challenges, and the UK is heading down a similar path without the same cultural preparations. Addressing a declining birth rate isn't simple. It involves tackling housing affordability, childcare costs, and work-life balance, key barriers that discourage young couples from starting families. If the UK fails to act, the economic consequences could be profound: a weakened labor market, slower GDP growth, and greater reliance on immigration to fill workforce gaps. While migration can help, it's not a complete solution, especially amid political pushback and tightening immigration policies. Without comprehensive reforms to support family life and long-term population sustainability, the country risks becoming economically stagnant, overburdened by the cost of aging, and critically short of the human capital needed to sustain growth. Number 8. Regional economic imbalance. The UK suffers from one of the most pronounced regional economic divides in the developed world. While London and the South East thrive as global economic hubs, many other regions, particularly in the North, Midlands, and Wales, struggle with lower wages, higher unemployment, and limited investment. Decades of centralized policymaking have left local economies underfunded and overlooked, creating a cycle where opportunity and growth are concentrated in a few areas, while the rest are left behind. This imbalance shows up in almost every metric. Infrastructure quality, public transport, access to healthcare, and even educational outcomes are markedly better in wealthier regions. Businesses are more likely to set up in London, where talent, transport, and capital are easily accessible. Meanwhile, post-industrial towns face decaying high streets, underfunded schools, and fewer job prospects. This pushes skilled workers to relocate south, further draining local economies of the people and investment they desperately need. The result is a two-speed Britain, where your postcode plays a major role in your economic future. Rebalancing the economy means more than handouts. It requires serious decentralization, targeted investment, and empowering local authorities to shape their own futures. Projects like Northern Powerhouse Rail, tech incubators in regional cities, and better vocational education funding could help redistribute opportunity. A strong economy cannot be built on one city alone. Diversifying growth across the UK would ease pressure on London, reduce inequality, and unlock unused economic potential in places that have been ignored for too long. Without addressing regional disparity, Britain will remain a fractured economy, where talent is wasted, growth is limited, and resentment between regions threatens national unity and long-term stability. Number 9. Post-Brexit trade challenges. The decision to leave the European Union was a defining moment in Britain's modern history, but it came with serious economic consequences, many of which are still unfolding. One of the most pressing issues is the rise of trade barriers between the UK and its largest trading partner, the EU. Before Brexit, businesses could trade freely across European borders. Now, they face customs checks, regulatory paperwork, and increased costs, especially small and medium-sized enterprises that lack the resources to navigate these complex requirements. Exports have taken a hit. According to government data, UK exports to the EU dropped significantly in the years following Brexit, and many companies have responded by relocating operations overseas. For firms in manufacturing, agriculture, and fisheries, the extra burden of compliance has made trade less profitable and more uncertain. This undermines Britain's position as a global trading nation, shrinking markets and discouraging foreign investment. In sectors where speed, reliability, and scale matter most, Britain has become a more complicated partner. The economic consequences go beyond trade statistics. Slower export growth means fewer jobs, lower wages, and reduced tax revenues, which, in turn, limit the government's ability to invest in services and infrastructure. While new trade deals with countries outside Europe have been signed, many are symbolic rather than substantial, offering only marginal economic benefit. To remain competitive, Britain must address supply chain disruptions, streamline customs procedures, and reinvest in domestic production and export support. Otherwise, post-Brexit friction risks becoming a long-term drag on the economy, one that hampers innovation, weakens industrial output, and leaves the UK increasingly isolated in a global marketplace that rewards openness, scale, and strategic partnerships. Number 10. Declining home ownership. Home ownership has long been seen as a cornerstone of financial security and social stability in Britain. But for younger generations, that dream is becoming increasingly unattainable. Over the past 2 decades, property prices have soared, far outpacing wage growth. The average first-time buyer now faces a deposit requirement that can take years to save, even with full-time employment. For many, the only alternatives are renting indefinitely or relying on family wealth, deepening the divide between the housing haves and have-nots. This isn't just a personal issue, it's an economic threat. Without home ownership, people lack access to one of the most reliable forms of wealth accumulation. This means fewer people can build long-term equity, leading to lower retirement savings and reduced economic security later in life. It also stifles consumer spending, as renters often allocate a greater share of income to monthly housing costs, leaving less to spend elsewhere. Rising rents, driven by limited housing supply and growing demand, have made things worse, especially in cities like London, Manchester, and Bristol. The bigger picture reveals a housing market that's out of balance. Planning restrictions, slow construction rates, and speculative investment have turned homes into assets rather than shelter. Without intervention, such as affordable housing initiatives, planning reform, and taxation on empty properties, the situation will continue to deteriorate. As fewer young people climb the property ladder, long-term inequality grows, and the nation's overall economic resilience weakens. A country where a majority rents long-term without stability or equity is one at risk of greater social tension, reduced mobility, and weaker intergenerational wealth transfer. The decline in home ownership isn't just a housing crisis, it's a structural economic vulnerability that could reshape Britain's future for decades. Britain's economy isn't facing one single crisis. It's grappling with 10 interconnected threats, each quietly compounding the other. From the slow erosion of home ownership to the dangerous overdependence on financial services, these are not just policy failures. They are deep structural weaknesses that demand urgent attention. Ignoring them means accepting a future of greater inequality, shrinking opportunities, and declining global relevance. But awareness is the first step toward change. The good news? These challenges are not insurmountable. With bold reforms, targeted investment, and a national focus on long-term sustainability over short-term headlines, the UK can still rewrite its economic future. That means rebalancing the regions, investing in people, modernizing infrastructure, and building an economy that actually works for the many, not just the few. So now that you've seen the full picture, we want to hear your take. Which of these 10 issues do you think is the most urgent, and which one do you feel gets the least attention in the media? Drop your thoughts below. We read every single comment. And hey, we pour hours of research, scripting, and editing into bringing you videos like this that go beyond the surface. If you found this helpful, please support our work by hitting that subscribe button. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference. While you're here, don't miss our last video. It dives into the shocking truth about the UK housing crisis, and you'll definitely see the connections.